We're starting our Bible study in the book of John, but not the entire book of John. We are going to study for the next 7 weeks the 7 I am sayings in the book of John. So John wrote his gospel not as a chronological account of Jesus' life. Instead, he wrote his gospel to prove that Jesus was in fact the Son of God and that he was God himself. There's a theme in the book of John that says Jesus came from above for the earth below. So the 7 I am sayings is something that was, I think, John started to understand later in his life, after he had time to think about everything that Jesus said to them and taught to them. And he derived it from the Exodus 3 chapter 14, Exodus chapter 3 verse 14 passage, where God said to Moses, "Tell Israel, I am has sent you." And the I am that we are talking about is the God who freed his people Israel from slavery in Egypt. And he sent Moses, and Moses was a little bit sort of apprehensive because he said, "But how will these people believe me?" And then it was when God said, "Tell them I am sent you." So every saying in the book of John that starts with I am is a revelation from the Old Testament, right through from the Old Testament through to what Jesus fulfilled about who God is. So it's an aspect of God's character that Jesus embodies in himself. It's an Old Testament fulfillment of "Tell them that I am has come to you." And in such a sense, you could say that tell them that Jesus has come to you. So the first of these 7 I am sayings we find in John chapter 6, where Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." Now John chapter 6, you'll study it for yourselves, but it's a long chapter, but it has quite a few stories. It has the miraculous feeding of the 5,000. It then has Jesus walking on the water towards the disciples and calming the storms. And then it ends with this teaching where Jesus faces the crowds and he says to them, "I am the bread of life." See, what was happening here is the people understood that Jesus would, or that the Messiah would bring them miraculous things, such as God did for them when he set them free from Egypt. And they wandered through the wilderness. And in Numbers chapter 11 verse 7 to 9 and Exodus 16 verse 15, we read how God provided for Israel manna from heaven every single day, and quail that ran into their camps that they were able to catch and eat. So God provided for their every need while they were in the wilderness. So when Jesus comes, Israel knows that the Messiah will be like God who provided food for them. But they were not really interested in getting to know Jesus himself. They were more interested in what Jesus could do for them, as in give them free food, provide for them from the miraculous feeding that the book of John started with, or the miraculous feeding like as their ancestors experienced as they walked through the wilderness. But when we look at the story of God and God's people in Exodus, God set his people free from slavery in Egypt, but he set them free so that he could make a people for himself, a people that would honor him and glorify him and worship him and follow after him. And that is why they absolutely had to rely on everything for God. See, God saved them for himself. But I think the Israelites very quickly became discontent with the way God had provided for them. They were not interested in becoming a people of God. They wanted to be a free people, but they didn't necessarily want to be God's people. And this is where Jesus also comes in. When he says in John chapter 6, "I am the bread of life," it does mean, yes, there's life and there's sustenance, and he will provide for them. And he says that those who partake of this bread that Jesus offers, or those that partake of him, because he doesn't say, I offer you the bread of life. He says, I am the bread of life. And he says, if you eat of me, you will never go hungry again. Meaning you will never ever be discontent again or unsatisfied in your life. But this is the thing. We must partake of Jesus and have more and more of him in our lives. Then our lives turn towards his life. And it's not about me living my own life and having my own way and being saved by Jesus and he must just provide for me so that I can live my life as carefree and as whole as I can. No, Jesus says partake of me so that you can share in my life. Meaning you have to let go of your old life, of what you want out of life. And you must live for me. Jesus saves us. Jesus feeds us. We partake of Jesus to become part of his life. And this is what Jesus teaches them in John chapter 6, verse 33 and verse 35. He says to them, for the bread of God is he who comes down out of heaven and gives life to the world. And then the people turn to Jesus and they say, oh God, give us this life. Or give us this bread that will give us life so that we will never have to buy bread again. And then Jesus says to them in verse 35, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never be hungry, and he who believes in me, cleaves to me and trusts in me, relies on me, will never thirst anymore at any time. See, we don't often miss something in our lives until it's taken away. We won't often miss bread in our life until we can't have it anymore. It's the same with Jesus. We don't often miss him in our lives until we don't have him as part of our lives anymore. And Jesus is saying, I am the bread of life. It's not just a life to be sustained and to carry on as I want to. It's a life to partake in and become part of Jesus' life. So as you study this chapter and the first of 7 I am sayings where Jesus says, I am the bread of life, may this be in your mind of partaking of Jesus and partaking of the bread of life so that you can have and be a part of his life. Until next time.